looking at the observation of the details when it comes to studying Scripture. We've seen so far that we should make use of interrogatives: who, what, when, where, why, how. Always be asking those questions. And then we've spent last few weeks on structural features. And tonight we'd like to begin on observing parts of speech. The last time I taught this series, we spent several months on this segment. I'm not going to do that, just maybe 2 or 3 weeks, but observing parts of speech. Again, using the analogy of a jigsaw puzzle, every piece has its place. Every piece has a proper place, and each and every piece fits in its place. And so it is with words. Every word has its proper place and fits in its proper place. And every word, just like every piece in a puzzle, has a connection with the pieces around it. So it is with words. Words have a connection. And again, a puzzle, each piece relates to the whole puzzle. Each and every piece relates to the whole puzzle. And so it is with words. Each and every word relates to the picture that is being drawn. So there's not a single piece in a puzzle, jigsaw puzzle, that is not connected to another piece. And once again, so it is with words. You can't just view a word out here somewhere. It has a connection to the whole picture. So, and that's one of the dangers of a word study. This isn't to condemn a word study, by no means. But one of the dangers is that you look at a word and you make no connection how it's used. So we have to realize that every word's connected to the whole picture. So we need to view every word as a piece of the puzzle. Well, I'll skip over this word because it's too hard to pronounce, or it's just a little word. Well, try working a puzzle that way and see how it works. You're not going to have the whole picture. Things are missing. And so this is very, very important. Just as every piece has a purpose in a puzzle, so every word has a purpose and is important to, again, the picture. So words, of course, are the expression of thoughts. They reveal. They reveal thoughts. They reveal concepts. But they're for the purpose of revealing. And this is of extreme importance, but nowhere is it more important than when you speak concerning the words of God. If words are important, and they are, and if every word has its place of importance, and they do, how much more so when it comes to the Word or the words of God? In Deuteronomy, we're not going to turn there, but Deuteronomy 24, verse 4 and 16, we read the words of God. The words, plural, of God. Deuteronomy 5:22, these words the Lord spake. And each word was important. The words which the Lord spake. Deuteronomy 9, verse 10. We read thy words several times in Psalm 119. We read the words of the book, Isaiah 29 and verse 18. Jeremiah 15:16, we read thy words and thy word. Singular, plural. Plural and singular. We read God's words. John 8, verse 47. Words are important, but nowhere more important than when it's God's words. And that's why we need to pay attention to each word. So, parts of speech. Every word fits into a part of speech, a category of speech. Now, there are 8 basic parts of speech. Some could argue there's 9, but there are 8 basic parts of speech in the English language. And these serve as the building blocks. They serve as the building blocks of a language. Those parts of speech, of course, are a noun, a pronoun, an adjective, a preposition, a verb, an adverb, a conjunction, an interjection. And the parts of speech answer the questions of who, what, when, where, why, and how. They answer those questions. Every word, the way to look at a word is every word, doesn't matter what the word is, every word has a job description. It does something. It's assigned a task. And we need to view words in that light. Every word does something, has a job description. So we're not to skip over the words. Now, noun, of course, names a person, place, or thing. A pronoun is a substitute for a noun. It takes the position of a noun in a sentence. They usually refer back to a noun used earlier, but not always, but usually. And they must, in order to make sense, they must coincide with the noun that they replace. That's why this foolishness today about pronouns, it's utter foolishness. They must coincide with the noun that they're being used as a substitute for. You have an adjective. Now, you don't have to identify a word as a noun or pronoun or an adjective, but you do need to know what they are. An adjective, of course, is descriptive. It describes. Its job is to describe a noun or a pronoun being a substitute for a noun. In other words, its job is to provide information about a noun or a pronoun. So adjectives are of great help in creating a word picture. You have prepositions. That's one of those parts of speech that are looked over many times. Prepositions. It shows a relationship between a noun and pronoun and some other word in a sentence. They're connecting words. They connect. They can be used as locating words, verbs, action, existence, occurrence, adverbs. Same job as an adjective, except its job is to define a verb. You have conjunctions, another one of those parts of speech that are looked over most of the time. Conjunctions are connectors. They bring words together. They connect. They connect words. They connect sentences, parts of sentences. And then an interjection. It's a word that's just used to express strong emotion. Perhaps the most common one in the King James is that word "oh," just "oh." It's an interjection. Expresses emotion. It functions independently of a sentence, but is of extreme importance. So consider some generalities about nouns. Again, a noun is a person, place, or thing. There are several classes of nouns. There are common nouns. A common noun names persons, places, or things in general. In general. For example, Genesis 1, evening, morning, day. It'd all be common nouns. It's just naming a person, place, or thing in general terms. The word apostle, the word saints, the word shepherd. Those would be some common nouns. Then, of course, there's proper nouns. Proper nouns name a specific person. God, Lord, Jesus. Those are proper nouns. Peter, Paul, Jerusalem, Ephesus, Thessalonica. Those are all proper nouns. They name a specific person, place, or thing. There are abstract nouns. It names a quality or an attribute. Mercy, grace, goodness. Concrete nouns. Names a tangible object. Something that we can sense with the senses. Sight, smell, hearing. Psalm 23. Psalm 23:2, pastures, waters, would be concrete nouns. There are collective nouns, singular in form, but names a group. For example, a flock. Singular, but it's really plural. A flock, it represents a plurality. A herd. Those are just basic nouns. But consider some generalities about pronouns. I believe the things that we need to notice perhaps the most are pronouns, conjunctions, and prepositions. Because those, and I say the most, and what I mean, those are the things that are usually ignored the most. And we need to pay very close attention to these. We've already mentioned last week when we were in observing transition, how important it is to notice transition in the use of pronouns. And it's very important that we follow that so we know who is speaking, to whom, and of whom, or of what. So there are personal pronouns. They, of course, replace the names of a person. Paul. Instead of using Paul again in the same sentence, you would say he. So it cuts down on redundancy and helps reading not to be so laborious. So these personal pronouns, they can be singular, they can be plural. And then you can divide these into three segments. First person, which we've already looked at, that's the person speaking. That would be such words as I, my, mine, me. It's the person speaking. Plural of first person would be we, our, ours, us. Then there's second person. That's the person being spoken to, which would be you, your, thou, thine, thee, thyself. Those are all second persons, the person being spoken to. Then, of course, there's the plural of those as well. Third person is the person being spoken of. And he, she, or the thing spoken of, it, his, her, so on. The plural of those, of course, would be they, their, theirs, them. In Psalm 23, you have the personal pronouns of my, I, mine, me. That's the psalmist speaking. It's first person. You have thou and thy, referring to God. That's the person he's speaking to. And then you have he and his. Third person, the person being spoken of. So in the Psalm, the 23rd Psalm, the first three verses, he's speaking of God. He's speaking about God. But in verses 4 and 5, he's speaking to God. There's a transition, there's a shift. And then in verse 6, he goes back to speaking about God. There are demonstrative pronouns, specific persons or things, this, that, these. And when you see those words, this, that, these, you need to ask what? What is it referring to? It's referring to a noun, but which noun? It's important that we keep track of this. Notice in Genesis chapter 2, Genesis 2, verse 23. And Adam said, this, that's a demonstrative pronoun. This is now bone of my bones. But what is this? Well, it refers back to verse 22, woman. Woman. This. It's a demonstrative pronoun. Genesis 15. Genesis 15, verse 10. And he took unto him all these and divided them. Those are demonstrative pronouns. These. What's he talking about? Well, that would take you back to verse 9. And he said unto them, take me a heifer. It's a noun. 3 years old, and a she-goat. Another noun. You have a heifer, you have a goat. Read on further, you have a ram, and a turtle dove, and a pigeon. Now, instead of repeating all of those again, in verse 10, he took unto them all these. Don't just read over these, but ask yourself, what is these referring to? And look back and see what it's referring to. Again, these is a demonstrative pronoun. You don't have to know that it's a demonstrative pronoun, but you do have to know what these is representing, what it's referring back to. In the book of Luke, chapter 21, book of Luke, chapter 21, and verse 4. For all these, referring to they all. In verse 3, for all these. These is a demonstrative pronoun. Of their abundance cast into the offerings of God, but she of her penury hath cast in all the living that she had. Acts chapter 20, verse 24. Acts chapter 20, verse 24, Paul's giving his farewell address to the Ephesians, telling them that it's the will of God for him to go to Jerusalem. And he says in verse 24, but none of these things. What's to these things? Well, that refers back to bonds and afflictions. Verse 23. He says, these things do not move me from the will of God. Doesn't matter. These things. So we need to get in the habit of asking, when we see these, what's these referring to? Luke 19, verse 10. For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that. It's a demonstrative pronoun, which was lost. In that case, it's defining lost. So it comes before instead of after. Then notice in 1 John 1, verse 3. 1 John 1, verse 3. That which we have seen and heard. Again, that is, it's in this case a demonstrative pronoun. You need to see what it's referring to. There are indefinite pronouns. This messes a lot of people up in their theology. Indefinite pronouns. We're not going to get into that, but in Genesis 4:15, speaking of Cain, lest any finding him. Any is an indefinite pronoun. Doesn't refer to a specific person. Be any person. Lest any. It's the same thing in Matthew chapter 7. Matthew 7 and verse 14. Because strait is the gate and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few. That's an indefinite pronoun. Few find it. Then, of course, there are interrogative pronouns, which, who, whom, whose. They're used to ask a question. And again, refers to a general people, but it's asking a question. Psalm 24. Psalm 24. And verse 10. Who is the King of glory? The Lord of hosts. Questions answered. He is. Psalm 27, verse 1. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Isaiah 53:1, you have it twice. Who hath believed our report? To whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? The who and whom are the same, by the way. The ones who believe the report are the ones that the arm of the Lord is revealed to. Matthew 6:27. It's which of you? Again, that's a question is being asked. And of course, they're possessive pronouns. Ephesians 1:13 through 15. Your salvation. Our inheritance. Your faith. And to find out who the your and our and your faith is, you have to know who he's writing to and who's writing. Because they're all included in the your. Your is not a universal your. This is a mistake that people make theologically. Well, your means everybody. No, it doesn't. It has to be taken in the context. Who is speaking? To whom is he writing? When he says our. Our, he's including himself. So you have to know who's writing, and you have to know who he's writing to. Same with the word all. There's not a universal all. All must be taken in the context. Some will say, well, all always means all. Yes, it does, in context. But it doesn't mean all outside of its context. Look at all the cars, and I point to the parking lot. That doesn't include the cars out on Bartlett Road. Doesn't include them. All in the context of the parking lot. Well, all means everybody. Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't any other time you talk. Why do you make it so when it's the Scriptures? There are relative pronouns. All pronouns really are relative. They're used to provide additional information. Notice John chapter 1. John chapter 1 and verse 9. John 1, verse 9. That was the true light, speaking of Christ, which relates to what? To light. That was the true light, which? The true light lighteth every man that cometh into the world. John 1:15. John bare witness of him, and cried, saying, This was he of whom I spoke. Whom? Referring back to what? He. So it's a pronoun referring back to another pronoun, relating back to another pronoun. John chapter 7, verse 49. John 7:49. But this people, I'm sorry, I've got a wrong verse here. But this people who knoweth not the law. Yes, but this people, relating to people. Then, of course, there are reciprocal pronouns. That would be one another, each other. Exodus chapter 18. Exodus 18, verse 7. And Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, and did obeisance, and kissed him, and they asked each other. They and each other. Same. Reciprocal of their welfare. And they came into the tent. Reflexive pronouns, reflecting back to another noun or pronoun. Genesis chapter 3. Genesis 3, verse 10. Genesis 3, verse 10. And he said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. Myself reflects back to I. You see, it would make grammatical sense. I was naked and I hid. But that's not what it says. I was naked and I hid myself. There's emphasis. Myself referring back to I. Even more important is when it's used of God. Genesis 22, verse 8. Genesis 22, verse 8. And Abram said, my son, God will provide himself. Himself. Himself refers back to God. He could have said, my son, God will provide a lamb for a burnt offering. But he will provide himself a lamb. It's emphasizing. It's emphasizing. Genesis chapter 18 and verse 12. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself. Why doesn't it just say Sarah laughed? It says Sarah laughed within herself. Again, it's for emphasis. And herself, of course, refers back to Sarah. John 4, verse 42. John chapter 4, verse 42. And he said unto the woman, now we believe not because of the saying, for we have heard him ourselves. Ourselves referring back to we. He could have said, we have heard him, and no. But we have heard him ourselves. Again, it's emphasizing. And ourselves refers back to we. John 6, verse 43. Jesus therefore answered and said unto them, murmur not among yourselves. Yourselves is referring to who? Them. Refers back to them. He could have said, murmur not. It's murmur not among yourselves. John 6, verse 52. The Jews therefore strove among themselves. Themselves referring back to Jews. And then, to close, there are emphatic reflexive pronouns. They reflect back, but they're emphatic. And again, the purpose is for emphasis. We don't talk this way, but the Bible does many times. Notice in John chapter 3, John chapter 3, verse 28. Ye yourselves. Back-to-back pronouns. Ye yourselves. It's emphatic. He could have said, ye bear me witness. Would have been grammatically correct. Ye bear me witness. But ye yourselves. More emphatic. Ye yourselves. He's stressing. Bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but that I am sent before him. Notice in John chapter 6, John 6, verse 6. And this he said, this is Jesus, to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. Once again, he could have said, for he knew what he would do. But he says, for he himself. Now someone will say, well, that's just extra words. We don't need those. And that's what many of the modern translations are. We're going to remove all the extra words. There are no extra words. They all fit. It's for the purpose of emphasis. He himself. It's emphatic. Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians chapter 2. Verse 20. And are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself. It could be Jesus Christ being the chief cornerstone. But it's Jesus Christ himself. It's emphatic. It's not an overuse of words. It's not an extra word. It's a word that fits, has a purpose, showing emphasis. Psalm 100. Psalm 100. Verse 3. Know this, that the Lord, He is God. Now it could have read, know ye that the Lord is God. But it's more emphatic when you say, the Lord, He is God. It's more emphatic. That's the purpose of it. Acts chapter 6. And verse 4. Acts 6, verse 4. But we will give ourselves continually to prayer. We ourselves. We ourselves. Again, it's for emphasis. It's for emphasis. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 4. You cannot improve on King James. You just can't do it. All these others take away. 2 Corinthians 1 verse 4, who commandeth us in all our tribulations that we may be able to comfort them which are in any trouble by the comfort we ourselves, there it is again, we ourselves are comforted of God. Wherewith we are comforted of God. Well, we're going to eliminate all the unnecessary pronouns, so we're going to remove ourselves because that's not necessary. Oh, but it is. Because it's being emphatic. We ourselves. Titus chapter 3, verse 3. When you remove words, you take away meaning. Can't be helped. Titus 3, verse 3. For we ourselves, there it is again. It's assumed if you say we, you mean ourselves also. That's not redundant. Again, it's for emphasizing. Pronouns are so important. So very, very important in the Word of God. You realize how difficult, how laborious it would be to read if there were not pronouns. I mean, just think about it. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that God gave God's only begotten Son. If you didn't have pronouns, that's how it would read. Reads much easier with the pronouns. So try that sometime. Just take out all the pronouns and replace it with the noun that it represents. Now that's something a lot of people today wouldn't be able to do. But again, a pronoun must coincide with the noun it represents. Otherwise it makes no sense. So try that. Just remove pronouns and replace it with the noun that it represents and see how laborious it would be to read. King James Bible is beautiful language. And every single word has a job, has a description, a job description, has a work to do. And we need to have some awareness. Again, you don't have to identify all the classes of pronouns. You don't have to do that. But the purpose is you do need to trace it. You need to be accurate in how you trace it. So we'll continue next week. But again, we cannot stress enough, observe every word. Every word. I've heard preachers preach, and they'll say, well, you know, that's unnecessary there. Well, no, it's not. It's not unnecessary. God wouldn't have put it there if it was unnecessary. You may not know why it's there. Just say that. I'm ignorant, don't know why that word's there, so we'll just skip over it. I mean, be honest. Don't say it's unnecessary because it is necessary. Wouldn't be there if it wasn't. Just like our bodily parts. Well, we didn't need that. Well, you do. God wouldn't have put it there if you didn't need it. May not need it as much as something else, but you need it. It has a purpose. Well, that part of your body has no purpose. Oh, yes, it does. Just because you don't know what it is doesn't mean it doesn't have one. God creates with a purpose. God led the translators with purpose. We need to realize that. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us in verse song. Let's all stand. Ben